All right, well, we have a quorum, so let's call to order. Any citizen comments? Okay. Let's take a look at the June minutes. You had a chance to peruse them. Comments, corrections? Motion to approve. Second. Second, all right, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, administrative report. I don't have much. Grace and I did meet with Bill Callahan to start talking about a variety of issues. And we ended up focusing, as I probably should have predicted, getting 3 historic preservationists together about concerns about this whole transition and the structure of it. And the sort of removal of historic preservation from the process. I mean, it really seems like in a lot of little ways, it's like a domino effect. Once you take historic preservation out of the title, I'm already seeing places where I got to remind people, oh, you left out historic preservation. I told you guys, I think, in the May meeting, our comprehensive plan task force group, that I looked at their webpage that they had for getting comments, and their definition left off historic preservation, right? It only mentioned economic and biological, right? And sustainability seems to be replacing historic preservation, which to his professional historic preservation that's a little bit offensive and of concern. So we are concerned about that. We would like to bring up is why can't we have historic preservation in the title? Why is it that we're getting rid of historic preservation as a terminology, even on our website? Now, I noticed just this afternoon, I was checking out their new website, and now it says that our knowledge areas are architecture, real estate, and sustainability. No mention of history or historical preservation or archaeology or any of that good stuff, which is a change from the terminology that used to be. So we are ready to work on this, but we're really wanting to push to reconsider how this, well, we're concerned about how this structure is going to work. Because frankly, as professionals, we in historic preservation, we've dealt with people in economic development and come out on the short side of the stick more often than not. So we're not sure how this whole thing is going to mesh and work and not sacrifice historic preservation, because and one problem that we all know is in historic preservation, if you're not taking it seriously, you think, well, we can put that in the back burner. There are no do-overs with historic preservation. Once you destroy something, it's gone. You know, as we discovered, like the Duquesne, you know, with the whole Brick Street situation, when that historic part of the town was destroyed, there's no putting it back. You know, and the residents were justifiably quite upset, particularly since they weren't notified about it. So that is one of the concerns that came out of our discussion. So maybe we talked about the advisory board transition. We might bring some of this up.
You're the chair, whenever you want to talk about it.
Bring it up, but so that's the only thing that I've really been working on.
I feel like I have a few comments, but I can also maybe talk about them during the advisory board transition.
Yeah.
Portion, so that's the things.
Yeah, that's primarily what we're talking about, because as we mentioned before, you know, we have one of the largest historic districts in the state of Pennsylvania. That's something to be proud of, but is also, well, there aren't any of these other communities that have historic preservation districts that don't have some type of historic preservation board. You know, there's not a structure for this, so that's a concern. So that's all I've got. You have a commission report?
So obviously the board realignment is going on, which we will talk about. We have been covering sidewalk installation discussions ad nauseam. Yeah, that's it, but it's a hot topic, right? I'm trying to figure out how to move forward with Yeah, thinking about sidewalks generally, right, and encouraging sidewalks, right, there's been a proposal out of the Environmental Sustainability Board to expand sidewalks, right, to actively, right now, there's a policy that says, you know, so many residents need to agree, right, to get full support of the municipality to go install sidewalks, but the idea out of the ESB was, wait a minute, this policy is very restrictive and it makes it very difficult for people to kind of cross the threshold. So can we reduce that to encourage people? So that's been kind of the discussion that's been going along, is how do we make this more effective, you know, mechanism to actually encourage installation of sidewalks, especially in places where we have gaps and those types of challenges. Now, through that process, the assistant planner, McMeans, you know, pointed out that we can encourage people to install sidewalks, but we can also essentially mandate that sidewalks be put in. And so there are different mechanisms that, you know, are in play there. So it's really a question of how do we incentivize, because as we were talking before, I'm a firm believer that I'd much rather provide a carrot rather than a stick. But how do we balance those things, knowing that walkability is an important aspect of the community? So that's a quick summary of sidewalks. Waste collection contract is coming up. So that is a hot topic for us, as I'm sure you guys know. A lot of changes this year. We only had, I believe, 3 bidders. Republic was out. So it was just Waste Management and Westmoreland. The discussions, I would summarize them as largely being around, you know, automated collection, which is now, you know, a thing, right? For the last few contracts, they've said we can't do it in Mount Lebanon. Now they're saying, yeah, it's here. Here are your options. So that's one factor. Also, pickup schedules is a factor. You know, how often do we pick up recycling? But we're going to essentially, it sounds like we're going to a fixed bin system. Fixed bin system being, you know, you don't provide yours. You know, either the municipality or the waste hauler provides a bin, and that's how much you get. So 96 gallons trash, 96 gallon recycling, I think is the baseline discussion point, but that's an evolutionary discussion right now. A lot of these decision points are just kind of forced into the contract, but we have some decision points to make to try to figure out how to make this work for the community. So that's another big discussion. The master plan for the parks, the main park master plan is kicking off. We got funding for that. We agreed on funding for that because we had an unassigned funds discussion in the last commission meeting. So that got funded to do a specific plan for the main park, right? What do we do with the rec center? How do we upgrade it? And our architectural studies part of that. But also how do we understand the tennis center, its evolving needs, but also all the other spaces in the main park. Ian McMeans has pointed out that the park has kind of evolved as opposed to having a plan. And we're at a point where it's like, yeah, we kind of need a plan. So that process is underway. And then the other big thing is, like I said, the unassigned fund discussion. So out of that, it sounds like we agreed on spending money on getting some concrete repairs done for the library. There's been some cracking in front of the library. Doing the Hollycrest Salem intersection right by Main Park on Cedar. Doing some upgrades to make that intersection more safe. That's where the crosswalk is. So trying to narrow that street and make it easier for people to walk through there. So there's going to be some changes to that. Buying new Zamboni for the ice rink because the oldest one is like 26 years old. It needs to go. And then let's see. Then there's a golf course. There's changes or fixes to the golf course. So some cart path reconstruction and then some equipment that's needed for the golf course. So a lot going on, a lot flying around. But I'm looking forward to talking about the hard realignment this time.
Any movement on the Brick Street policy?
I have not heard anything on the Brick Street policy. It's been a while. I'd have to check with Ian. My position on it has always been, and I've been pushing all along, is we really just need to get to a point where there is a framework to say commission needs to decide which ones are preserved and what that average annual budget needs to be to do that. And that needs to go into the budget every year, right? Because ultimately, this is a financial discussion. We could say we want to preserve all 9.85 miles. That's great, but if that costs $800,000 a year on average, over, over life, if you average it out over time, you need to be setting aside that much money. Future commissions probably are gonna balk at that, and we're gonna keep kicking the can down the road. So how do we get to some point where we have the commitment of at least this current commission and establish the policy so that we know the number of miles of brick, so that staff can be planning for it, whether it's asphalt or brick or anything else, right? There's a total number and it all gets baked in, as opposed to trying to, whittle through the different ones. Because my day job, I work with, staff to make sure elected people don't do dumb things. I always tell people that, a lot of it is how do you embed this in a process so that future commissions aren't going, well, we don't want to do that this year. Because then it's the next year and the next year and the next year. How do you get that incremental funding mechanism to support the brick? That's the hard part, right? Is getting people to say, okay, we're going to do 8 miles or 7.5 miles. And we've kind of spun around those discussions for as long as I've been on commission. But that's the crux of it, right? Is, how much you're going to spend every year. But I have to check.
Do they have a number and that they know that what the maintenance of brick versus regular asphalt is?
Yeah, they did a variety of studies. CMU did a study, and then we had Gateway kind of take all that analysis, and because I told them, I said, look, I need you to just give me an annualized average cost for a mile of asphalt and then a mile of brick. And basically, what it came down to was it's about $60,000 a year more per mile of brick. Again, now that's ballparking, right? But I think if you annualize that over the life of the assets, right, and the kind of the type of construction, and you can argue over, well, they could do it differently. But if you just say, look, 60,000 miles or $60,000 a mile, 8 miles, that's probably a reasonable number, knowing that inflation happens and construction can be more expensive. You get other variables. At least that gives people a proxy framework to say, okay, if we add that much more per every mile of brick, the commission says by policy they're going to preserve. Okay, commission 1 year says, well, we're not going to give it 60, we're going to give it 50,000 a year. Well, you're still in the right ballpark for those annual costs, as opposed to ignoring it and letting the brick continue to deteriorate, which is what we've kind of been. We've been going to the other end saying, well, we'll throw an extra 100 at it, as opposed to saying, well, we're going to pull 40 away from 600. So it's trying to change that dynamic in terms of understanding the funding needs.
So, he sent us the list of all the streets and their current ranking and so forth, and asked us to comment on it.
Okay.
So that's why I brought it up, but.
Yeah.
I mean, one of my concerns from a historic preservation perspective is that, okay, and I applaud, I agree with you totally. It's a big move, getting it actually cemented in as some sort of guarantee. Okay, we're going to fund this,
right?
Because for a century we haven't,
right?
And that's why we're in this mess, right? But at the same time, we don't want to automatically say, well, if it's not on the definite preserve list, we're going to destroy it right away.
Oh no, I agree.
Yeah, that was what it looked like in the.
Yeah, no, that wasn't the intent. The intent was we're going to let some of these streets just ride as long as we can, but when they come up for reconstruction and if they're not on the preserve list, right, then then you need to initiate the process and start moving toward that transition.
Right.
But yeah, it's not like, again, I mean, we spend about $3 million a year on streets for 86 miles, 88 miles, right? There's a long way to go before you get to any one particular street.
Yeah, I mean, because some of them, right, they're PCI is fairly high still. They're in the district. There's no negative. There's no reason why it's not on the preserve list that I can see on the listing here.
I'd have to look.
Yeah, other than maybe it being a steep street.
Yeah, steep. Yeah, well, steep is one of them. Steep is one of them, and then you got them just being like short stretches, right? That was another big one. I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah,
it's been a while.
I know. Right. Well, so I mean, just one example, like McCully Street, PCI has 72, and it's in the district. It's got contiguous brick streets. Everything on here seems
Okay.
actually preserved, but it's on the not replace list, so.
Yeah, well, and I think that's where there's still kind of this discussion of, I know Ann and Mindy were very much like, well, let's try to preserve as much as we can, and I'm of the opinion, it's like, let's get to an agreement. More than anything, because I want to preserve something and start a funding mechanism.
Right.
Yeah, so again, I think I don't know that anybody's, opposed. But if we say 9.85 miles, I think we just have to figure out, okay, taxpayers, we've got to come up with X number every year.
Right.
As a baseline, and how do we do that, right? Is that raising taxes? Is that allowing circuit brick to deteriorate to a certain point while we incrementally raise taxes to build that capacity? Right? How many people are going to be, I mean, I don't know about you guys, I look on Facebook and they're annoyed with the sign toppers because there's the historic district. So now if I'm saying, well, you're going to preserve your brick streets with your taxes, but you don't live anywhere near it, we're going to get that as well. So it's like, how do we find that balance? Yeah, I think is the question in my mind, and I'm open to what the streets ultimately are. For me, it really, like I said, it's really, for me, it's most importantly, it's like, whatever we're going to do, let's make sure we're funding.
Well, the CMU survey did find that 90% of the respondents were willing to spend more money.
The people
Conserve
on the
the streets.
streets.
No, not everybody in that
No.
survey was on the streets. I
Okay.
wasn't on the street.
All right, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's the question, right? But it went back to that, for how much, if I recall correctly, right? At certain thresholds,
Right.
right, they were like, yeah, no. So again, we gotta figure out what the threshold is and at what point is it appropriate, what point isn't it? But again, that's where it's like, if you guys, come back and say, we really want to see these ones that are on the iffy list preserved. Okay, fine. Definitely escalate it. I think that's an important part of the conversation.
Thanks. Anybody else?
Sorry, I'm late.
Laura, you got anything?
This is the time of the year when staff puts our budget requests together. I will tell you, there's not one person on the senior staff who hasn't been completely aghast at the prices of everything. Just even with last year to this year, it just seems like no matter the sphere, the prices are going up. So we're having to make some hard decisions on our end before it goes to finance, and they make some hard decisions before it goes to our municipal manager, and he makes some hard decisions before it goes to the commission. So just so you know, there are many, many levels of eyes on the budget before it gets passed to make sure that we're not just throwing things in there to fund them without really thinking about what the implications are. So it's going to be a tight year, I think. Trash notwithstanding, I mean, that's the big one. The happy news, as I told you last month, we are still on track for our August 5th Uptown Unveiled party on Washington Road. It's noon to 6. We are closing the street. If you remember the old ultra parties, same kind of feeling. 6 live bands, I think. The showcase bands are Big Fat Mallard, and which is like a funk band, and a Fungus, which is a great cover band, and then a couple of other things. Big games in the street, cornhole. East End Brewing is putting their tap truck on the street. The saloon has a special permit to sell drinks over the window out into the street. Lots of games for kids and stuff like that. So it's going to be a really good time.
What cross streets are they closing? Are they?
Lebanon and Cedar. So both parking garages will be accessible. I feel like a flight attendant. You'll have to enter the south garage back here on Florida.
Okay.
I
I just wonder, 'cause I live on Washington,
Mhm.
so I didn't know if, like, is it gonna be closed like at Academy? Like, that's usually where they close stuff, or they close it at
no, it
Cedar?
only ever closes at Cedar and
Cedar,
Lebanon. Yeah,
okay,
because we
cool.
have to provide a detour.
Okay,
So
got
we
it.
would need to be able, and people need the Academy lot too. So
Yeah, oh, I know.
you
And
guys
it's
need
nice,
those over there.
trying
It's
to get
really
into my
important.
parking space.
yeah, no, you're good. You're good.
Okay, cool.
I think the only thing that would probably displace you is the artist market, which actually takes place. in
I usually, whenever I see that on the calendar, I'm just like, okay, I just won't leave today, because my park
Yeah.
up behind there, so it's all good.
And that is scheduled for October too, so we're pretty excited. So as we were saying earlier in the meeting, before the meeting actually started, the website development still is continuing. We just added the police department to it, so all of their stuff has been moved over. They had an independent site. And we've just put all of our codes and our home rule charter online with a company called E360, which means it's now searchable, complete. It used to be a PDF that was very hard to look through and very hard to find on searches. So now it's all online. It's linked on our website. So hopefully that will help people find the places they need to go. So that's what I'm doing.
Hey, great. Continuing business historic signage, Mary Ellen isn't here, but the signs are up and people are complaining. Not everyone's complaining.
I know.
It's like that, I haven't heard a lot.
Yeah, I like them. I think they look good, but yeah, I hear all kinds of weird things. So that's one of them.
Brick streets, we've already sort of discussed that, right, Matt?
We did.
Public education, Alan, you're up.
Okay, I have a number of things to kind of go through. So, let me see. So Laura is bringing up so I met with the librarian and started putting together sort of a bibliography of resources that we could begin to put on the website. I guess I wanted to review what I had here.
Trying to turn this out here. Hang on. It's not dragging out my view here. And let me get out of. All right, maybe I should put a new laptop on my request. There we go. All right, sorry about that.
So in working with the librarian, we identified several former articles that were in Mount Lebanon Magazine that may still be relevant to people if they're interested in doing renovations with their homes. She worked with the library system to develop a whole series of resources. There's about a page and a half of those different books that are available in the county at some place that relate to mostly different types of housing and restoration and renovation work on those kinds of housing. So you can kind of scroll through, go down through those and see the list that was put together there. And then I added some sort of technical publications that I found online that may be of interest to people as well. So there were some links there. So I guess the input I'm looking for is, do we want to give people a little bit of time to add to this list before it's published? What's the best way to publish it for people to get access to it?
The other thing too that would be helpful is if you would go through what's already on here and maybe go through and see if there's anything that you no longer want on here. Because some of those things were on here and some of them weren't. Like we had some of the National Park Service things
Yeah, the technical.
and the living with styles and some of that stuff. So maybe some of that stuff is no longer relevant or not as relevant as this material.
So I don't know, is there a way to, other than sending an email out, to copy this to everybody? And then if people want to either comment on it or add to it, and then next month we could then.
Or the best way is for me just to email it to everybody.
Yeah, why don't we just email it to everybody and then folks can,
Okay,
got ideas, comments, additions, or,
that would be great.
yeah, I don't see a lot of archaeology on there.
There's some stuff that I actually have from grad school, because I was going through the other day, like a host of historic preservation stuff that's like accessible, like shortened PDF forms of the preservation briefs that's more like technical for homeowners, like choosing the best like roof shingles, and even goes into stuff like solar shingles and things like that, and like all sorts of stuff that fit within preservation stuff. So I can find some of those PDFs that are
As
useful.
long as they're accessible, some of the problems. that we
Yeah,
had
no,
with
I have them like
notes,
downloaded, so they're good to go.
But I mean, they're not, the text is readable.
Mm,
It's
oh, yeah.
OCR, okay. Because when we switched to the new website, we had to take a lot of our PDFs because the software that people use to read,
Mhm.
some PDFs were basically just images that were imported into a PDF. So just make sure any PDFs that come have to be saved as a PDF-A and then readable, so.
I mean, that
Mhm.
there was the woman you sent me the name, Megan. Ellen was on that email too. What was her name? She was
Oh,
like Hazel.
Yeah.
Megan, I forget her last name, but she has an old tutor. And I stopped by on my walking route one morning, we met, walked to her house. It was a lot of the same stuff that I had to do in my house, and I guess I get calls all the time from neighbors and my wife's friends, whatever, about their homes, and it's a professional hazard. Like, I can see some sort of resource, technical resource where after 90 years, your house, the steel lintels and all your windows are gonna be rotten. And this is what they're gonna look like, you know, real practical things that homeowners are gonna have to deal with. Not only from a historic preservation perspective, but it ultimately will
Maintenance,
preserve
yeah.
it. But by extending the life of the envelope of these, you know, beautiful old homes. And I think, you know, steering some of these things towards technical.
Yeah, the technical preservation briefs
Stuff
are really
is-
good. They get
yeah.
into the nitty gritty, like wood windows and mine, like every single thing. They get very detailed. So
Yeah, I don't know if we want to look at one here.
I think I saw the general link. It was either on the website or in there.
Identify like the 10 most common problems with old homes or something like that.
Yeah, I don't have this problem now, but when we had our house in Oakland, California, it was 110 years old. And I would have loved to have, you know, the resources, because, yeah, we were peeling layers of, you know, carpet and then linoleum and then, but it's like, I didn't know what to do, right? And it would have been really helpful to.
Yeah, each region has specific
Yeah.
construction techniques that are common for the area.
I mean, yeah, they're very detailed and they talk about, you know, what you should do, what you should look for, all that sort of stuff. They're very specific.
I don't know if I've ever seen it, but there should be like a summary guide for old house maintenance out there somewhere. I would think.
Let me look through some of the.
Some that.
Let me look through the
people,
books
you know,
I
don't
have.
to go into a technical.
Yeah,
paper.
no, there's
Yeah.
definitely stuff that is like more accessible, especially as of recent. I'll look through my stuff and see what I have. Even to suggest something, and it might be, you know, in the circulation system somewhere, and I just haven't even noticed it.
This is just as being obviously not an architect, but you know, curious, are there YouTubes?
There's a lot.
Oh,
This house.
but high quality ones, right, that. Because to a certain extent, right, I know me, I'm inclined to go watch a 5-minute YouTube, over read a technical brief.
This old house does, like, even though it's a popular show, like they.
I was just gonna
No,
say,
they
that's
really
where I always got
do.
mine.
Talked about that. My professors in preservation were on that show talking about, like, it's very informed. It's not just like a Home Depot ad or anything, you know. So honestly, and they have the new version now. They don't just have the old ones from before I was born. They have like they have a new series now, as well. So they have like updated stuff, for new 21st century.
But the biggest thing is they make it look so easy, like you just take this.
Yeah.
Oh, is that all?
Exactly.
Where's the marital argument in there?
Yeah, all the good, yeah.
No, that would be great.
Okay, well, if you send that out, then we can.
Yeah, it's already out.
add to
Should
it.
be in your inbox right now.
Okay. The second item was, we had talked last time about inviting Teresa Duff, who comes from Lineage Historic Preservation Services, to maybe come and do a joint sort of forum with the Historical Society. I don't know if you had a chance to talk with folks
Our meeting is Wednesday,
Wednesday.
so I'll bring it up then.
Okay, I did talk to Teresa. She is interested, she's available. She can come the first 3 weeks of September. She can come sometime after October 15th. And she doesn't require any honorarium. So she's just really looking for when it might be, what kind of format. You know, she can bring sort of things and do demonstrations. So I don't know, you know, maybe you talk with the historical. Society.
Yeah, I'll bring it
They
up
have
to them.
ideas about what might be the most interesting thing.
They're trying to think of different events too, as well, was the discussion when we met in May. Wow, it feels like forever ago. So I will definitely bring it up to them. Yeah, I'm sure they'll be on board.
And if they're stuck between September and October, we're wrapping up the September magazine now, so October will give us a little more time to publicize. it.
Yeah, I'll see what's on their agenda for that. I think the only thing they have coming up is, they're trying to figure out a date for their like main fundraiser, but I think it's gonna be
It's
like
usually in October.
later fall, yeah, later fall probably, thinking about maybe November this year, so we'll see.
And they do forums themselves sometimes too, right? They have series of forums.
Yes,
At
I
the Historical
can't remember the
Society.
last time they had one.
So it might dovetail with one. I check with their planned
Yeah.
dates. We can maybe dovetail with them that way. With one of their planned dates if they don't have a topic.
And you know, do they tend to do those in the evenings, on weekends?
It seems evenings is
Yeah.
definitely when things are occurring.
Okay.
And they do like their tours and stuff are on weekends. But they're also, I think, decently flexible about some of these things because they're looking for new material to do as well. So they should, I think they'll be all right. They'll be flexible.
If you go to her website, it's lineage dash HPS or Historic Preservation Services.com. You get a sense of the kind of thing she does. So it's pretty much everything other than stained glass kind of work that she does work on. So it can be pretty interesting. But do you know where they tend to have those?
I believe in the Historical Society building, to my understanding. Is
So
where
they will be past the library.
Yeah.
But if we're doing something jointly, we might be able to find a bigger space.
Yeah, it's bigger. They have mentioned doing things like over in a room over here sometimes. So,
Okay. Well, if you get back to me after Wednesday's
Yeah,
meeting, then
absolutely.
we can kind of get back to her and see what seems to work best. In a similar, you know, I've talked to at least a few firms about doing something probably in the spring next year, but you know, there's a lot of questions about, do we want to make this like a, you know, like a 1 hour forum? Do we want to have multiple firms each have their own hour and make it like a half day kind of thing? You know, have each firm talk about a different topic. So I guess I need to get information back to those people to just try to understand what makes the most sense. You know, I don't think it would be hard to get 4 or 5 different firms to volunteer to come. You know, and then we could go and we could talk to the AIA about, you know, setting up something where people would come and get, you know, professional continuing education credits if they came. So that would make it sort of a bigger kind of thing. So if we wanted to do something like that, I think we could put something like that together.
you know, time that might be, just in my mind, I'm thinking, you know, like late February, early March is when they do that home show downtown, like that big thing. And I always feel like around that time, people are like, oh, I'm gonna do like my renovations before like spring comes sort of thing.
Right.
So like, I feel like people are always looking at like doing their renovations and getting advice around like that time. So even like coordinating it around, like around then, I feel like would get a lot of people rather than doing it like when the weather's nice, you know, like.
You really have better attendance if the weather is kind
Yeah.
of crappy.
Yeah, honestly, it's true.
Not much else to do. The holidays are over.
The residents can't even have it.
Yeah, that's true. That's
I
true.
want to consider March, which is, most of those home show convention things are in January or February, so we don't want to compete with them necessarily.
Oh, no, the Pittsburgh Home Show is the first week of March.
What was it? We don't, we want to do it then,
Yeah.
but maybe the week after that or something.
It might already be scheduled.
They'll be all fired up and inspired and then we'll.
Yeah, I mean, people go here.
So do we think having like multiple groups
Present.
present like on a specific topic?
March 8th through 17th, 2024. And then there's another mini one, October 6th through the 8th, 2023.
Judy Devlin or Grandma Judy.
She gets the emergency, she's on the emergency Contact, she gets through my silence button.
My mother has the same feature.
So what you,
Hey, when you guys did it in the past and it was so wildly popular, let's not reinvent the wheel too much. What made it so popular, do you think?
Well, there was a theme for everything. So the whole overarching theme was good design makes good sense. So the theme was design that either enhances your property value, helps you sell your house for more. It was the tie between design and economic viability. So having a theme definitely helped. Definitely having the Con Ed really helped because that got people coming out. It was during the day. It was like, I think, I want to say it was 9 to noon maybe, and we rented Mellon Auditorium for it. That, that was a bigger scale. We had a lot of help. We had a bigger budget. We had materials that we printed and handed out to people. But really it was just the promotion ahead of time, the getting people excited for it, the reaching out to other groups who may be interested. Okay, participating, some of the professional organizations you mentioned, the AIA, there's probably some other groups as well.
Could we repurpose some of the printed materials from that?
Oh, we don't have a whole lot left over. In fact,
Oh.
I think I gave my last full completed kit to Anne, but
Okay.
I have
Oh, that's
some of
right.
the stuff upstairs. But it was nice because people left with like a takeaway, like an
Okay.
organizer.
And
So
were the presentations pretty dynamic? Was it?
they were very dynamic. But again, that was before Zoom and online and all that other stuff.
Right, exactly.
It's definitely a lecture format. We can do all sorts of things. We can have tables. I mean, I've often said it would be nice to have our inspections folks at some of these things because you're talking about all this stuff. Well, okay, now what are the rules? What can we do? What can't we do? At the same time, so. But really a little time to get the word out is really what makes it more successful because people are busy and we want to get them.
Put it on their calendars.
so how much do we want to gear it towards something that would Mount Lebanon residents, that's like our focus, right, is for them, not so much what the continuing education needs would be for professionals.
I think they might go hand in hand though. Like, I think one of the things that I'm seeing from preservation to sustainability architecture space is like, alternative materials. Like, renewable materials, how can you work those into preservation? How can you work them into save energy costs in your home? Like all those things. There's so many things like that. I went to some in Burlington, Vermont. Of course, that's a very a state that's very accommodating to that sort of stuff for sure. But it was super interesting. And you had everyone from grad students who were wanting to learn about that stuff coming in from the different colleges to homeowners, people wanting continuing education credits who are in different firms and stuff like that, coming to just like hear to some degree, like a sales pitch, but also not really, it's more like, this is, what our firm can do. They work with these sorts of things. And here's how it can save you energy costs. Here's how it is like better for the environment as a whole. Here's how it fits in with preservation. And they had like a question time and it's just super interesting, honestly. And they bring their own materials too.
Call it this old sustainable house.
So that's that's really stuff I feel like,
Sustainable
like
house.
that's what Mount Lebanon is pushing towards anyways, right? So it all meshes together, I think, to some degree.
This whole sustainable house.
Well, a next step for this might be for you to convene a committee of several members of this group and do some research on what you think you would like, talk to the firms and kind of come up with, that way we don't drag on month to month without you making progress, because I know you want to get, things moving. Would be a suggestion for the next step.
So if we work backwards from March to get out the word out, how many months in advance would you recommend?
I mean,
Or the
I would say
better.
6 months is good.
6 months.
One of the phrases I think of that I always said in my preservation class was the greenest building is an existing one. Is the one
Yes,
that I
built,
built,
yeah.
yeah. So like, I mean, that's a theme that 100% people would,
Right.
buy into and agree with and appreciate at Mount Lebanon, because there's not a ton of new construction here, except for that one down on Washington.
But when you speak to the Residence Academy this year, you could promote the event. That's Residence Academy is from January through the first week of March. So, and historic preservation is usually somewhat toward the beginning of that long group. So we'll have a couple magazines to get it out. We can put things on the website. We can put it in, we have a push newsletter. I mean, Main thing is just locking up the date, time, and location. You have a $1,500 budget through my office. And then obviously whatever you could get in kind, like a lot of places are willing to donate folders or, whatever you could get.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So when you had it at Mellon Auditorium, did you have to pay to rent the space?
Yeah, but it's not much.
And
And it's usually just to pay for like the tech setup and everything.
did you do that during the school year or?
We did. We did. Because we did ours during the day, but you don't have to, you could do it after that. But that would be the other reason to get a date in your kind of head now to see what they have open, if you wanted to do it in that big a venue.
It was on a Saturday, I'm assuming,
It was not, it was during a.
during the
school day.
week, during the workday.
Yeah, because people came and did it as part of their workday.
Well,
But again, it was a while ago, but people work from home a lot now, so people have more flexible schedules.
Yeah.
So, but again, it's totally up to you. There are other school district properties rooms that we could use it wouldn't be as big as Mellon. Mission Chambers hold what, like 65 people maybe? So,
Not really set up for presentations.
yeah.
So we get together, maybe probably just 3 people,
It just has to be fewer than 4.
right? It's gotta be fewer than 4
Okay,
board members. And I think actually you should touch base with Mary Ellen. I think she would be a good
yes,
one to be involved.
she's a real estate person.
Because certainly with improving the value of your home and that kind of stuff, might have some really good ideas. Be one, and then one additional volunteer who's not amongst those folks who are here right now.
You'll go come to the meeting, leave with a job.
Well, I might suggest that, getting someone from environmental sustainability might be interesting.
To be on the committee, that's a good idea. Anybody you have in mind?
I actually haven't been the liaison for a while, but I can reach out and find out.
We have a sustainability coordinator on staff as well. I'm sure he would.
Is that Greg?
Yeah.
Yesterday. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's just a thought. I'm not saying you have to, but I would just, for me, it's like, if this is a municipal event, right, and we're talking about this whole sustainable house, right, maybe there's some energy there. I know they've wanted to do events, and this might be an opportunity to get, some of their, message out about a similar topic. What about the Historic Society? Are they going to be involved?
I can bring it up to him.
Yeah, we could ask.
I can ask.
There was, I sent you and Alan an email with the name of a woman from the Historical Society who was interested in dovetailing with us on these types of events.
Did you send it to the email that was not like?
I sent it down yet. I'll resend that.
Okay, yeah, make sure.
It was a contact that Ann had made this spring in terms of talking about potential, or maybe later, but as I guess. It was a while ago. Bill, interested in working with us on events like this, so I'll make sure you get that name too, but I don't know, Alan, if you need me to resend that to you.
I think I have it, but. What's the name of the director of sustainability?
Greg
Ward.
Wharton. Greg, G-R-E-G spelled conventionally, W-H-A-R-T-O-N.
Okay.
Okay, anything else?
That's it.
You did bring us something.
Oh, yeah, I did get the map of the historic district mounted, and I have the receipt.
Oh,
So we can use $65.
How does that all?
Okay,
I'm glad you said that, because when I priced it out, we were looking at like $300-400 to get things mounted, so.
okay.
Yeah,
So
So we do need to talk a little bit about what we're gonna be doing then on First Friday, because we have
Yes.
space, right?
correct. So yes, Eric has a table for you. I asked him to kind of co-locate it by the Historical Society. Thought there'd be some synergy between the two. So it'll be right outside this building. and off to the left a little bit from the front door,
Nice.
well, wherever the front door might be.
Mhm.
At the time. So yeah, so you're set at 7 to 10. You had mentioned maybe doing 7 to 9.
Nine, probably.
Yeah, once it starts to get dark, it's not
This, right?
August.
August, okay, August 4th, right before the, okay.
Um,
So
so I will be there and
maybe what we can do is send around, we can do this by email, get a sign up sheet to make sure that we have at least one or two of the board members there at any given, like for a half hour stint or something during that our period. So, I mean, just to guarantee that
Somebody's there.
somebody's there, right?
2 is nice too, because if somebody starts to feel ganged up on, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need.
It was nice to have an ally there with you.
Yeah, we did this before COVID and it was a lot of fun actually. To talk to people about historic preservation. And I was always surprised at how many people I talked to had no idea we had a district. Didn't even know they had a house in the district, didn't even know that they had a contributing member house in the district. And you get a plaque from the historical society. We sold a few plaques that way.
And obviously your biggest questions are, what does this limit me from doing? Nothing. If my house is in the district, what do I get for that? Also nothing. If my house isn't in the district, why not? When it was built before 1947. And you can explain, and sometimes when people pull up pictures of their houses, it's easy to tell. You can look and see, okay, you put a porch on the front that's not of the period, you put a certain type of building material, you changed a roof line, things like that. Well,
But,
vinyl siding is a big one.
and you might,
What was a big one?
Vinyl siding.
Oh, right.
Vinyl siding or vinyl railings, sometimes people put vinyl railings on the front because, and again, to be neighborly, we remind them that people do renovations for all sorts of reasons. It doesn't mean their house is any more or less attractive or less desirable. It just does not fit the criteria.
well, we might mention also that we're looking at the possibility of even expanding the boundaries of these, if they're not in the historic district, you know, ask, would you be interested in this if we were to consider expanding the boundaries? Because in talking with Bill Callahan, I mean, one of the main reasons for the size of the district and where the boundaries are set, they ran out of money.
Right.
They just, you know, they'd had a consultant who was doing this work, it already went well beyond the original plan, and they already spent a lot more money than they thought, and at some point they finally just had to turn off the faucet. Said, no, we can't afford any more. Here's the boundary, and so it is totally arbitrary in that sense, you know, I mean, things have to be contiguous, they can't have a big gap.
That's the other big one that you will hear from people from Sunset Hills, like why I have a whole street and we have to just say, you couldn't get it to be contiguous with Dormont in the way on Scott Road there.
And that just, well, it's not that we couldn't have, but was just at the time seemed the best way to do it, but the lack of money, you know, money issue. Money's always an issue. Right.
Money is always an issue.
So, but it's
Who's
just
gonna send
something.
out the sign up?
What's that?
Who's gonna send out the sign up to choose your half hour or whatever?
Oh, I'll send that out. Just a quick thing. I'll email everybody and say, hey. Here's that, you know, we're gonna do this from 7 to 9. What half hour block do you want to commit to? Make sure we have at least 2 for each half hour. You can stay longer, I mean, you know, make sure it doesn't.
And do we need any other handouts?
I was gonna ask what's gonna be on the table, besides the beautiful phone mounted map. What did we have on it for
We have,
last time?
QR code things, showing the new website or like links to the historic preservation website thing. We wanted to, or like a printout, you know what I mean? Yeah, just like, it's easy for people to like just scan it and pull it up on their phone. If we're like, if you want to take a look at, you know, the maps online, or if you want to look at more resources, just scan this, you know, that sort of thing. People like to do. Easier, they can take a picture of the QR code too.
All right. Ready to go? Advisory board transition.
The fun part. You want me to just start?
Yeah.
All right. So my intent, when I started working on this was mainly to give the boards a more effective mechanism to engage. There are currently 11 advisory boards, which is a lot. I'm sure you guys, those of you who've been on the board a long time, probably have experienced no commissioner showing up. Sometimes, maybe you haven't.
Not
That's
this board.
Mindy is,
okay.
It's been great.
Oh, no, Mindy's been great.
And Ann before her.
yes, and
Um,
Oh, wait, Ann.
was the first, yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of the boards get, or traditionally have got no attention, right, from commissioners, right? I get well, we want to promote X. How do we do that? Well, it's kind of a gray mush of like questions, like how do we do things, right? We're a board, we're here, we want to contribute. Now what? And for a lot of the boards, it's just kind of a plodding, we listen, we drink coffee, and then we say bye, and we'll see you next month, which is not beneficial for anybody, right? Everybody's here to contribute, we want to push forward, and how do we do that? So for me, that's really the core of it, is how do we actually make the boards more effective at engaging on whatever the topic might be? And for me, a lot of that is primarily around getting a clear governance structure in place, right? How do we do this, right? What is the process? As Laura will tell you, where's the agenda? It's online. The Zoom link is online. You see it every time. It's always there. You know how to attend. But it's also, how do we do agendas? What is the agenda? What is the structure? What is the process? It needs to be consistent. You can't be all over the place. We've got board agendas that look all different ways, right? It's just kind of the way it's evolved. And it's not a bad thing, but at some point you kind of have to kind of trim the tree and say, okay, wait, let's get a clear, consistent process in place so that residents can engage effectively, but board members can go through a consistent training so that they understand what the process is. Again, if you guys want to propose something that needs commission approval, how do you do it? No one knows. No one knows, because there's no formal process. And for me, that's not a detriment necessarily to me, right? I can push what I want to push, but really what's more important is that I want you guys to be able to push things that you feel are important through a process that is clear, that is going to benefit the community. Now, does that make me sometimes vote no on things? Yeah, it does. But that's the nature of it. But right now, things just wither and die because no one knows. Or maybe commission doesn't want to vote on something, right? It just disappears, right? And that's not healthy either. So how do we create a more clear and consistent structure that has that framework in place that says these are the steps we go through? Now, staff spend a load of time, right? If they have to staff all these boards, right? It's their evenings. And it's like, okay, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. I want them to contribute quality time, not just volume of time, right? Laura does a great job. It's not always the case with every board, right? So how do we get consistency around staff liaisons, because they're linchpins in this, right? And that's just fundamental. We're all residents trying to do our bit to push something forward, but ultimately they're the linchpin by which all things happen. So how do we give them clarity as to how things need to be moved forward consistently with an agreed upon expectation? So that's kind of the heart of where I was at. Why 5? Well, there's 5 commissioners, right? Then there are 5 statutory boards. So if we have 5 advisory boards, that means that there are 10 boards. Each commissioner gets 1 advisory, 1 statutory board that we're responsible for. So that creates some consistency there. It gives staff more space to work. And frankly, looking at all the other communities around here, I think the next highest number was 6 advisory boards for a municipality, right? And we had 11. So it's like, okay, let's find a number that's going to work. And so
Thank you.
5 was where we came in at, which I think makes sense to me, broadly speaking. So that's kind of background story as to kind of my motivation for pushing a lot of this stuff through. Now, why more specifically, right, historic preservation and ESB and economic development, which I know, right? I looked at it and went, that feels a little weird. My background, I was a history major in college. I've lived all over the world. I love I love historic preservation, so don't think I'm just like, yeah, the guy's going, yeah, it's not worth the trouble. I really do care about the topic, and I think it is important. Just as Grace said, this whole sustainable home. I think that's frankly a great example of the synergies that I actually would like to see out of the board, right? This is one story that we are trying to blend multiple pieces together with, right? Economic development and sustainability and historic preservation are all pieces of how do we understand the resiliency of our community, which actually, it's funny, we started calling it the resiliency board, even though that's not what we put into the policy itself. I'm kind of regretting that we don't just go change that, because resilience really is kind of speaking a deeper language, at least in my mind, to what we're trying to address. But all that said, from a structural perspective, again, I'm trying to look at this from a governance model perspective. I'm a shorthanded, the resiliency board, right, is where you come together and ultimately are voting on matters, right? That's what we are doing here. There's lots of activities that will happen outside of the formal structure of the body itself, right? As with all governing bodies, right? You're going to go have side meetings, you're going to have subcommittee meetings, whatever it might be. In this new structure, we can create standing subcommittees, right? Of the resiliency board. And a standing subcommittee can still continue to have meetings, right? It just can't be the full board of the resiliency board. Or you can't have a quorum of the resiliency board. It can still function as the historic preservation subcommittee of the resiliency board. And frankly, have all the duties that this board currently has within that framework to go into that resiliency board. So I think what I'm trying to find is how do we create that flexibility within the structure while still preserving the structure that is necessary, for these purposes, without having the full body of a board unto itself. So that's what I'm trying to balance. Is how do we blend these things together? Because I think the shared conversation is important. The overlap is important to see the differing opinions, while recognizing that there are individual conversations that do need to be had. Now, that's the other thing, is that in this governance structure, right, we're going to have board members, and then we're going to have associate members, right? And my hope, again, with this consistency of communications, is that maybe we can even get other people to attend meetings who actually care, heaven forbid, right? I know it's a long shot, that can contribute in subcommittee meetings, right? They might not, associate members won't have a vote at the resiliency board. But in a subcommittee meeting, you guys are going to have lots of different conversations, and that could be members from the Historic Society, it could be other groups, right? There's more flexibility at that level to continue to perpetuate the dialogues that need to be had, to vote on matters that are going to be raised to the resiliency board, to be voted on, to then go to the commission or wherever it might be. So that's, for me, it's about the discipline of the structure and ensuring that we have the flexibility. One thing I've been telling Ian, we're going to have to do training. Every board member in the future is going to need to go through a training, right? How do we do this? What are my responsibilities? Right? We have the Residence Academy, right? People learn about the municipality, but how do I learn about being on a board? Most of us have participated in some ways, whether it was in high school, or something, right? We learned the Robert's Rules of Order and everything. But again, we've all learned it, but each board works differently. Why is that? Because we've never, there's just that the stretching of those muscles. But if everybody goes through training, we understand what the responsibilities are, what my role is, what we can and can't do. I think that builds those patterns and creates more resilience within the structure to ensure that we are actually raising topics that are important. And there's a clear path to make change, which I think is ultimately what we're trying to do. Is I want to propose a policy. Right now, that's a very nebulous concept for most people. And I spent a year and a half talking with ESP about, look, use Google, go find another municipality, look at their policies. If you like it, drop it into a Word document, change it, propose it, have a conversation about it, tweak it, vote on it. I will push it to commission and have a conversation, right? About can we vote on this? Right? Again, those aren't muscles that even commissioners typically will use, right? Staff don't typically use, right? We have a process we all go through. I'm trying to also broaden that out a little bit, say, no, boards need to be more active in participating in the governance framework. So again, I'm rambling now.
No, you're not.
Is this making sense as to where I'm going and what I'm trying to accomplish? Recognizing that there are clear things that we need to make home for. But that's what I'm hoping you guys will say, is that we need to make sure these things are embedded in the agenda with a standing subcommittee for historic preservation. These are the 4 areas that need to be covered every meeting. type of thing.
Well, my first reaction is based on my experience with this board, that actually we have been pretty good at knowing the process. You look at the Brick Streets policy, we put that together, we did this the right way. I'm looking at what you're proposing, I'm thinking, okay, now I've got a smaller group that's gonna have to put together a policy like that. Then they're gonna have to go to this board and go through it all over again with these people of creating a structure, getting an approval, and then convince the leadership of that board, it might be an engineer, or whatever, not an historic preservationist, to take it forward from that point and be the point person and convince the commission that this is what, and by that point, it's so far removed from what my original contribution was, I'm not sure I have any faith in what the end product is gonna be.
Well, that's where advocacy to your commissioner, plays in, right? I get your point.
Well, my commissioner's not a big historic preservation, so I relied on other commissioners.
Well, exactly. And I think, and that's the power of it, right? Is that, I don't see this being so bureaucratic that you're going to have to honestly, I suspect that if you sat down with the Environmental Sustainability Board folks and you said, hey, we want to do brick preservation, they'd be like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. We want to keep those things in the ground. Stormwater mitigation, and right now they'll give you the 50 things, right? Because I sat on that board a long time, they would all agree. They'd say, yeah, this is a good policy and we want to vote to support it also. Right, so I don't think there's going to be that huge conflict and muddying of waters that you might expect. What I find is that most people, if you have a strong voice, people will nod and say, yeah, it sounds like a good idea. As long as you want to do it, go.
Here, if I can go ahead. Just when I was talking with Phil and Bill about this just from a professional preservation perspective, I think we agree that these things can work in concert with one another. And I certainly understand the idea of 5 commissioners, 5 boards of simplification, but also in some sense giving more action to the actual boards. That was one of the things I was shocked by when I came here, and I was like, oh, this is it's a non-voting board, but it's not, I always am blanking on the word. As compared to other preservation boards in different cities, it doesn't have enforcement,
Right.
basically.
Right.
And I when I was looking at all the boards, I was like, it's not that they don't do anything, but it's they're lacking in enforcement. And so I think this is a good plan from a professional preservation perspective. The thing that I'm concerned about is, in some sense, the only thing that is holding firms and federal organizations, et cetera, from the only thing preventing them from pretty much doing whatever they want and not really caring about any sort of preservation authority is if there is a named preservation authority, where they're doing the work. So if there is not, if it's not obvious that preservation has a presence, they have absolute free will to completely disregard any sort of preservation practice, and they can sort of sneak by the section 106 process. So that from a professional perspective, the word preservation matters. And I think that was one of our biggest concerns, that, if we can't have our own separate board, and I understand the 5 commissioners, 5 board things makes a lot of sense. It really does. I don't want to put extra work on anyone. If there's a way that preservation could be worked into the name, or is it, if it's labeled resiliency board, and then there's a tagline underneath it that tells people what it is, you know. One of the terms that we sort of attached onto is community preservation. I don't know, I personally like the term community as opposed to historic, because it can still, like, it shows how it works in concert with other things like sustainability. So, you know, like, if it's something like resiliency board, economic development, community preservation and sustainability, then, you know, is that enough? I tend to think it might be enough if it's labeled, but then beyond that, the other thing I think about is once you are on that board, not talking about like, you know, associate members or anything like that.
No.
Money talks, and so economic development, I am concerned, is going to have the loudest voice at the table.
I would stop you
Like-
right there.
Do you disagree?
Economic development, everybody sits around, drinks coffee and listens to Eric Milliron talk for 45 minutes.
Okay,
That's
I'm just
literally our
concerned
meetings.
sometimes.
That's it.
Okay, I was just concerned that sometimes it's not that economic development and historic preservation are at odds, because they aren't. They can work very well together. And you know, we can even see it with like facades and downtown, and all that sort of stuff. It's more that I want there to be like an equal presence from sustainability, from preservation, from economic development, to where the leadership isn't just one of those three. Like, it really is genuinely working in concert. And I agree that I think it has to do with people who are willing to like speak up loudly about it.
Yep.
But I want to ensure that, so that from both those perspectives, preservation isn't washed out in the board in terms of its voice, but also we talked about like dilution of impact is one of the things we were talking about. There isn't a dilution of preservation from a protection sense.
Well, no, and I think that's actually the part that I would like to learn more about, right? In section 106, and I was sat there with Bill, and I'm not familiar with all of this, but I think, yeah, again, environmental sustainability, economic development, and historic preservation in Mount Lebanon have no enforcement capability. They are purely advisory boards. So to your point, we sit here, we talk, no one's going to come here and ask permission. But, and this is where I don't know, can we, these boards, propose policies that say, we want to see certain things occurring on planning and zoning hearing boards. We want a certain question asked at boards that do have statutory authority, where those things actually do need to occur, knowing that, yeah, we are asking for it as a historic preservation group, but we have no statutory authority. Those do, we can use those triggers. Now, again, for me, that's the pivot that I think is important, is how do we find the right mechanism to use to actually ensure that these things that we're trying to accomplish are done, knowing that this board does not have that authority, and it's not going to, right? We can scream loud. Well, I can scream loud lots of places and no one wants to listen. But if I can get the policy adopted by the commission, and I'm spitballing to a certain extent because I don't obviously know all the rules, but that's where the process comes in. Is like, we think this is important and we want to see this thing adopted for every new property or whatever, or every
Well, I mean,
development, whatever it might
Yeah.
be.
In the historic preservation ordinance, like one of the things that it talks about is sort of providing like impact assessments, which like sustainability could like do as well, about like,
Right.
what's the like impact assessment of whatever this is on sustainability, like the same thing with preservation. And I mean, to some degree with like economic development, what's the impact of this economic thing happening? And so, you know, like even tying in like something like that as a mechanism, I think would be
Yeah.
useful.
Well, and I honestly, this conversation, right, with the environmental sustainability board, it tended to be much more nebulous, right? These are nebulous concepts, right? How do we promote solar? How do we, right, do big concept stuff?
I think what Grace and Phil are saying, we do have a very big impact in like putting 4G
Yeah.
antennas, and they had to contact the board to ask what the impact was, and had we not had a historic preservation board, they would have just put one up. So,
Right, no, and I
think
remember
that's what
that,
Grace
yeah.
saying in the title. It's important to have that preservation in there, because when these, you know, Verizon or whoever comes through,
Be apparent, it has to be apparent, even, we're not saying necessarily change the name to preservation.
No,
Right, you know what I
again,
mean?
that's, for me, that's language, right?
Yeah.
And there are requirements, right, that are to
well,
achieve these
Verizon
goals.
probably goes Mount Lebanon, Control F. preservation. And if they can't find something there, they're like, oh, we can just start going on this.
That's exactly how it happens, yeah, everywhere, every single
Right,
historic
but-
preservation law case.
And that's a problem that I totally agree with. We need to solve for it. Do I need to have a standalone board just for
No.
Verizon? No. Right, but the
that-
point is,
That's a, but
100%.
that's just an example of
Yeah.
a federally funded or permitted project that has to go through this
And
106 process we're talking
Right.
about, which allows us to at least say, yes, it will have an impact. We would like to be a consulting party if you go forward with this on what it's gonna look like.
Right.
And the problem is
can't
if you
tell them no.
don't do that even
Right.
once, then, and one company gets
Then it-
their thing
yeah,
approved,
it
then
rolls.
from that point on, they can put an antenna, whatever it looks like, put it wherever they want in the historic district. Because we've already approved it.
right,
Well, and I
I'm not
think
responding.
Mindy asked you all to do that by the end of the summer, have that list of things that you do that has to remain. For example, this board also has review power to the extent that it can, advice and consent over his neighborhood signs. So the neighborhood sign policy, so the only one that has been done under the new policy is Lebanon Hills. So they have to bring the design and historic preservation board. You have to look at it and say, yep, that goes well with the neighborhood before it gets passed on for official. So those things Mindy had asked to be compiled into a document from this group so that it can be explained to the commission who doesn't interact with you regularly exactly what those things are to make sure that they're accounted for.
You know, we're looking at the zoning ordinance, there are design guidelines that are beyond zoning that are attached as exhibits or appendices in the back of the ordinance that try and in a vague way, control for building massing, sizing, facade control, setbacks. And, you know, we've had to comply with it on some of our projects. You know, is there a way for some of the basic, at least some crude historic preservation modeling could sneak its way into the zoning ordinance so that it is statutory?
Yeah, probably not, because that's under the purview of the planning board. So you do have input to the planning board in your liaison, which is why we asked that this board staff the planning board so that you do know of those things and can speak and then work through the planning board. That's kind of been the way that it has worked. The example that I used is the Rite Aid on Cook Lane. When they proposed it, it was a drive-it building that didn't fit in with the municipality. The Historic Preservation Board and the planning board worked together. Couldn't really compel the developer because we don't have anything in the zone, you know, the zoning code against it, but just said, look, from a value perspective, can you switch this to brick? And they said, okay. So it was more of a relationship.
And they
building.
do say, okay, when I go to those meetings, if they ask for little changes like that, they'll do it, as long as it doesn't cost them a whole
So a
bunch
good
more money.
relationship, yeah, with the planning board is really the easiest way to make that happen. Rather than trying to get it into the zoning code, which would take years and in my humble opinion, probably not.
Well, what Grace was alluding to earlier was the state legislative code, you can create a legislative historic district. And that entails creating what they call the Historical Architectural Review Board, which has the authority to tell someone
Yeah.
or require them to get approval from them before they modify a structure in the historic district.
Okay.
And there was an attempt to do that in Virginia Manor, I understand, before I came on board. And I've got different perspectives about what happened there, but there were a lot of people who were on board with it. But some neighbors weren't. Because,
It was proposed as a grassroots effort by a group of residents,
right,
but the other residents said, wait, all of the things that you are going to hear when you go out into the public and they hear that their house is in the historic district. Oh, you mean you're gonna tell me what color I can paint it? You're gonna tell me what, that was the paints, whether I can knock things down, roofing materials and expense were the things that came up most often. Well, I can't afford a roof.
A slate
material.
roof, yeah.
Correct. Which is what really fueled it. And the fact that it was Virginia Manor in a neighborhood where people were redlined out in certain periods, it was probably not a good neighborhood to start, and that people felt like, all right, now we're here, now you're gonna tell us what we can do with our houses. So it did not go over well.
although it was a minority that was opposed, but a very vocal. And the folks who were in favor of it didn't want to create a lot of bad feelings in the neighborhood. They just said, well, it's not worth going through this whole process. So there are things like that out there, but it gets kind of tricky when basically you want to propose private homeowners have yet one more thing to get approval on before they can change it, right? And it's okay if it applies to my neighbors, but if you want me to do it, then I'm gonna rethink.
That was a great quote that Mindy said. Really what people want is to control their neighbors.
You know,
Well, and I think that for me, that it goes back to the conversation we were having before we started, right? That, you know, we have carrots and sticks, right? And the vast majority of the time, I personally am looking for outside organizations to have the carrot. Right? If the partnership can have the carrot, right, the municipality has the stick, right? But the stick is the last thing you pull out, right, to do something, right? I don't want to tell someone what to do on their property unless I absolutely do. But I want to encourage them to go do something, do something nice, please. But I'm not going to try to force it because it becomes very legal and very complicated and there's lots of challenges, right? I mean, you get lawyers involved and it's a drug out process. So try to minimize that as much as possible. But as a board, what do we have? We have the ability to incentivize or provide frameworks for staff, right, to communicate, right? We have an organization that we are overseeing is essentially it, right? That, I mean, when we really boil it down, right? The commission oversees the manager and promulgates policy and ordinances and the budget, right, for 140 odd people, right, that has responsibility to oversee rules, you know, to maintain a certain cohesiveness in the community. It's not a lot of rules. I get can I have wildflowers in my front yard? I thought we had to have lawns. No, you plant wildflowers in your front yard. But people, again, the cultural perception is I'm supposed to have a lawn because that's what I see my neighbors doing. So I'm supposed to do that. And if I don't conform, but honestly, that's the behavior that, you know, a community is going to develop. So we're playing on the edges of how do we incentivize people and provide incentive to go down a certain path, right? And we don't have a lot of control. The planning board, right, the zoning hearing, right, they have a stick, but even then it's, you know, it can get contentious and really complicated. So how do we play here, right? Again, with the section 106, it sounds like we could say, hey, can we talk, right? But we want to be there. So how do we understand the framework that we do have, the opportunities we do have, and then leverage them as effectively as possible? I think for me, that's the question. And teasing these issues out, saying these things have to be here. Language, right? If you say historic preservation has to be there, okay. Let's make sure it's in there. And Laura can do that easily, make sure that that's on the website. We can change, you know, the ordinance as necessary, right? Voting happens, right? That's what we're here for. But let's tease all that stuff out, make sure, because this is going to be a transition, right? And it is going to be awkward, and I know that. And we're going to spend 2 years kind of being like, this makes no sense, and this was dumb, and why did he do that? And you can all blame me. But in 5 years, it will be a process that hopefully we have established and it's more clear and consistent. And we are still, you know, continuing to hit those key milestones that need to be addressed. But that's why, again, I think Mindy was right. But make sure that list is robust, knowing that it's not going to be perfect, but we want to embed that in the kind of the core governing framework. So you have to be making sure these things are there.
and it's a starting point, I'm sure.
Yes.
We'll get there and, oh, shoot, we forgot, whatever, that might be able to be added later.
Yeah, this is a human endeavor. It's always going to change.
I guess as an historic preservationist and particularly as an archaeologist who has seen a small number of archaeological sites, because we tried things that it didn't work, and then the site's gone, and then we go, oh, we shouldn't have done it that way.
Right.
And I've seen a lot of that.
Yeah.
So that's where my skepticism comes from, because we're trying something new and we think it's gonna work, but if it doesn't, how much stuff do we lose before we realize it's not working?
Good point, Phil.
I agree. I agree.
Like the 106 stuff falling through the cracks, for example, all of a sudden we got things being built that we didn't know were gonna be built.
What if you guys will send that list, I will commit to sitting down with Ian and vetting that stuff into the documentation and coming back and having a conversation about how does this structure look? are we including everything? Are we ensuring that that governance is in place? I will commit to doing that. Because I agree. Right?
Well, yeah, well, it's just the one, that's one part of it, we keep harping on because it's important.
Yeah.
Particularly with the 106 process, that you have to have a point of contact. Then, so, because otherwise a letter goes to somebody, they don't know what it is, and it goes.
Right.
Luckily Laura shared that with us, and I said, oh, I know what that is. We gotta do something about this. And that one, they were already on the ground and they had done their survey and taken pictures and stuff, and
But the important thing is they hadn't put anything into inspections yet, which had they done that, they would have found out that we do have rules about towers and antennas and things like that.
but
that
by
they-
then, they would have already gotten the approval from the SHPO's office to do what they wanted to do,
Correct,
so we.
but they
can
still have to
the
get our
historic
approval,
preservation
so-
thing.
Right.
See, the SHPO's office is the one stick we do have, but only for federally
Right.
funded or licensed
Right.
permanent projects.
Well, and again, I think for me, and this is one of those, yeah, I think there's the broad learning. Right, that we need to make sure that there are certain things in place so that we're visible. But then there's the specific learnings of, okay, in section 106, right, the situations, we need to be clear, Frank, maybe put it on the website.
All we need is a
something
line
say-
on there on the
say
website
it
saying
says
all section.
All sections, yeah, go to this place, right? And so there's specific learnings and frankly, section 106 will go to Laura or go to Ian or whomever it might be, right? But then internally, we also need to have a document so that when all staff retire, right? That there's still that thing that says, oh, what do I do with this? Well, here's the process.
I have some really like simple pared down like primers on 106 and 4F and like other federal state things. That like really boil the process down that like might be, I guess, useful and like bringing it to the conversation that I can like also like send out and like bring to you as well to like help, yeah.
Well, and then it's those types of things for me. It's like, okay, again, I always say, and I firmly believe this, we have an amazing staff, but there are only so many of them. We are, especially you guys, not me, you guys are augmenting, expertise that they have. How do we embed that knowledge, right? Because, we will only be here for so long. They will only be here for so much longer. So how do we take that knowledge, get it into some type of documentation, not necessarily for a future board, but for staff in their processes to say, oh, we have a repository that we don't know what this is. But once upon a time, we had some board members who took the time to go, here's what this is, and this is a resource, and here are the steps that we have agreed need to be taken to address that. Because again, I go back to ultimately, we're advising. Staff is carrying the ball. How do we make sure that they are prepared? Even if the step is, oh, I need to take this to the board. Okay, but at least they're empowered with knowledge because they're the ones who are dealing with that day-to-day activity and need to know how to kind of play air traffic control. So how do we do that? And I think that's the other kind of learning that I get from this discussion is it's not just about the board, it's also about and how do we make sure that these processes are being established and understood because these things are important and we don't want to lose sight of them.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt. Laura, do you guys have a quorum without me? I'm going to need to step off shortly.
Yes, sir.
Okay, apologies. I'll circle back to you.
But last thing, and I'll stop. I don't want to discount your concerns at all. Everybody, right? If keep raising them, right? I want to solve, right? Work with me to solve. Let's try to make sure that we're doing the best thing. So in no way am I trying to just discount them. I'm trying to say these are ideas of how we can move it forward and make sure we're embedding these solutions. But I'm just one voice. So if you guys have other approaches, I'm all ears.
Good place to change the language now to add historic preservation.
I'm sitting in the webpage right now.
Well, she's going to put it in the webpage now. We can, again, if we want to change language in the ordinance, we can change language, right? And we will have to go through a process for that. But again, we have to pull out the language, look at it, and then propose changes. And then.
When you say language in the ordinance, are you talking about the ordinance that talks about the boards?
The board realignment, Yeah.
So that would require another council vote, is what you're saying. Yeah, okay, sorry.
No, that's, honestly, that's, again, that's the nature of it, right? I mean, if we vote on something once and it stays there for 30 years, we've all failed. Yeah, we learn, we keep fixing, we keep tweaking.
We have an ordinance for our board.
Yes.
Yes,
It's so outdated though that we don't really, because it precedes the
exactly.
historic district even. So that's why there's not anything in there about section 106 or anything like that. So I mean, that
Through my materials and get some stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, that, honestly, guys, I do believe the boards should be more active in governance and proposing changes to governance frameworks. Because that's really where the kind of core power is. So staring at policy or staring at ordinances and proposing changes to ordinances, I think is one of those areas where we fail to, take advantage of the authority that we do have. So in so much as you look at the ordinance that we just passed and you go, I don't like it, can we make changes to it? Again, that's where I'm like, the new board structure should be much more clear about, we want to propose this change, this board votes on it, it goes to commission looks at it, says, yeah, make sure, it goes to solicitor and everybody to make sure it passes muster, right, legally, and then it can go to commission for a vote. That's, I think, an area that we haven't really taken advantage of, and we should.
I know, well, some of it we'll need to see a draft. Just what you're proposing. I've heard this at the coffee shop, and again, we were talking about some of this, but I'm not sure exactly how the structure will work. Like my concern is, for instance, how is the board made up? How do you know there's going to be a historic preservationist on it? Because that was one of the issues about the name of it, because with the name of that board, like when I moved to Mount Lebanon, I thought, oh, there's a historic preservation board. I went to a meeting, found out what was going on. I see that economic development right away. I'm flipping the page.
Yeah, no, it's a
You
valid
know,
one.
I would
Yeah.
never volunteer or even to go into that, see what was going on in that meeting.
Right.
And so that's why I think we need it in the title up front.
Sure.
In terms of making sure even you get people volunteering for that board, they're gonna be useful or helpful in historic preservation.
Agreed.
I mean, if all you get are people that are really interested in economic development, making up the 9 members of the board, right, where's historic preservation?
Yeah, no, agreed. I suspect that what you would find is if you're going to get a preponderance of any group, it's going to be sustainability folks.
Yeah.
Or historic preservation, though I'm finding you guys are pretty vocal too. Economic development is actually pretty mundane. You guys.
Well, and I think in their defense of economic development, Eric Million.
Milliron.
Is that Milliron?
Yeah.
I want to make sure I pronounce that right. He's a pretty historic, he is a man of taste. Let's just put it that way. He is not a, will make money at all costs kind of person.
Oh, yeah, I don't think anyone in Mount Lebanon is that way. I wasn't
Yes.
trying to suggest that earlier.
Yeah,
I
no.
just wanted to make sure there was like equal presence for all the boards.
Yeah, well, but to the point, right, about how does the commission select future board members, right? Can I force a future commission to do anything? No, I can't. But can I encourage them to, always be looking to balance this board with these 3 interests equally? Yes. Right, that I can do.
Well, I mean, would you have language along those lines in the ordinance?
Uh,
That structure creates a structure for the board. I mean, this ordinance is very specific about qualification of members, so you could me perhaps. In the ordinance, you could specify these areas of expertise you have to have.
I am open to. Pushing on changes, yeah.
Leaving it open-ended,
Yeah,
relying on some future commission to actually know which persons will be relevant.
yeah, no, I agree, but the reality is, right, is that even if you put language in there, right, to a certain extent, the future commission is gonna put whoever they want to put on. Right, that's a reality. Again, same thing with brick, right? I can say you should set aside this much money for brick preservation. But they have the authority at that point in time because they're the elected officials. It's their choice. So it's more about how do we build the kind of cultural discipline into the organizational model so that staff are just like, oh yeah, you need 3 historic preservation people. And the commission will go, oh, okay. And they go find 3 people who look like they have those qualifications. When in reality, they could pick 9 economic development people because they have the authority to do it. But culturally, right, and again, new elected officials don't usually understand all the mechanisms. They'll be like, oh, okay, the staff said we need these things, so we better go get these things. So, yeah, but to that end, yeah, I mean, if you guys look at the new ordinance and say, we'd like to see more language specifically about these things, I'm all for making changes. It takes a little extra work, but okay. I mean, look, we're doing this once. We're not gonna do it, we're not gonna do a house cleaning like this very often, so let's do it right.
All right, well, it's getting late. We appreciate your carrying us out and also giving us this feedback, but we probably should move on here.
Yes.
Comprehensive plan, I don't really have anything new at this point. Unfortunately, I got a notice about a task force meeting for our group just a couple of days before the scheduled meeting, and I had conflict that couldn't get there, so I'm not sure what happened, but I was pleased to see that they finally, in their most recent nutshell, did add the phrase historic character.
Yay.
Under economic development and sustainability. Which was not there.
You can take the knife out of my pack.
Well, that wasn't you that did. I complained to the folks that were putting the surveys together and put this stuff together, the contractor. Sure, I gave them an earful about that.
Good for you, Phil. Thank you for doing that.
At least did that. So anyway. The Economic Development Council that had to take off. I guess we'll learn more about those folks.
Yeah, you will. I can give you a quick summary because I am the liaison to that. It's there's a lot going on in the business district. Beverly is 100% full. So there's a lot of, as I'm sure anybody who goes over to Beverly will see, it's very active. There's lots of activity, 100% occupancy, so that's great. Uptown, obviously with the transition, I won't talk about the completion of the project, but I think we are at 85% occupancy. Don't quote me on exact numbers, but that's the general ballpark. There are several new businesses. You all know East End Brewing, the Golden Beetle,
Caspian Corner.
Caspian Corner, which is very tasty, I would say.
Home decorating.
Yes, yeah, it's very nice.
I just saw that did Badano's Pizza close?
They bought a building in Dormont. They wanted to own the building and they wanted to have an opportunity to own here. I feel like I need to clarify that because
And I was like, oh.
the first reaction from people is that like, oh, they got tired of the road project and really they wanted to own their building. So they bought.
And I saw it said something was coming soon.
Another pizza place.
Okay.
Where's our bagel shop?
I know, do we have?
Yeah,
For bagels,
that was teased, I know. And that was happening, but then it was between the bagel shop and the property owner. Something fell through, I don't know what exactly, but that was the issue, was there between those two, so they couldn't come to an agreement. I know that Eric Milliron is working with that lady who has the bagels to find her a spot. She's still very interested. And there are a few other things coming in the Uptown Business District that are in the hopper that sound like they're pretty interesting to bring more activity to the business district. So all in all, given we've had 3 years of construction, our businesses are doing fantastic. They're humming along. And there's more interest, so it's good.
All right, Grace.
Meeting
Your meeting
on
coming up.
Wednesday. I expect to hear more about events, fundraiser, and I will bring all of our event stuff to them.
Planning board.
Yeah, they had a couple of projects for preliminary approval, one for preliminary, one for final. The one for preliminary that was interesting, they're making it's called the Black Oak Hill Plan, and it's going to be on Old Gilkison Road. If you know where Cedar and Gilkison meet there, right on the corner, if you go maybe 1 or 2 lots down. It's got a big area with a few trees, grass. They're gonna put 10 single-family attached dwellings. there. It's R3 zoning district.
Is that across from the Montessori school?
No.
No,
It's-
no, it's
Down by Public
Galleria,
Works.
between Cedar and the Galleria.
Okay,
That-
okay, the opposite direction.
Yeah, on the Galleria side of the street.
Okay, oh, yeah, okay, I know what you're talking
Yeah.
That's good, because in the other direction is not.
about. It's technically.
Right, right. And old Gilkison Road runs behind it.
Yeah, I know, I live right there, so.
Oh, you do? Okay, so anyway, that got, then there was some discussion about sidewalk width. And putting in knee wall for pedestrian protection. It's kind of not a very safe way or area to walk along Gilkison Road. And one of the planning board members said, safety trumps price. That's it. You know, you have to make this a safe place for pedestrians. And a little bit of discussion about trees, but they're not anywhere near doing a final plan presentation, but when they do, Ian definitely said, please bring materials that you're going to use. And I think this is because the last few planning board meetings, I said something about materials, thanks to you guys helping me decide what to say. Just to make them tasteful and match the surrounding area. It looks like the design's pretty traditional sod. But they didn't have a lot to display at that meeting. But anyway, so they're gonna come with everything next meeting. And for any resident that shows up and wants to see, they'll have something to look at. So that was that one. And the other is, do you know that funky little bar by the post office on Castle Shannon Boulevard? It's like the jungle.
Yeah,
The old Ivy.
yeah, I don't feel.
Yes, someone is very funky. Anyway, they're just doing some lot consolidation and they're going to put in, make it a single lot. And they're gonna put in a new business there. That should be nice. And that was like, they just approved it like that. So very simple. And that's it. And then Ian gave a little comprehensive plan update. I guess they're going to, at what stage are they in? Focus group meetings are happening now, and there's gonna be a smaller public outreach push. And then it'll be finalized and moved to the commission to be voted on. So that was it.
Next stage is for them to propose, say, okay, here's what we heard and that's good, what do you think?
Right. Yeah, that's the focus group thing.
Oh, the focus groups are done.
Oh, the focus groups are after? Oh, they're done.
They're done for this stage, then they'll come back for one last. There'll be 9 focus groups, so we're.
Oh,
three,
you're
three,
right.
3, so yeah.
Okay, that's right. Anyway. So that was it. That's my report.
Partnership design, did I give you anything for us tonight?
Yeah, Eric Milliron sent me the new recommendations for the Uptown Preservation District. Draft document that was submitted just this, I think, just Thursday, Wednesday or Thursday of last week. So I've just been going through that. They're non-compulsory, they're volunteer, advisory only. And it's just, and the general breakdown is that it's describes the various styles of the uptown architecture, has kind of a vocabulary of an inventory of all the building types, and it breaks it down into contributing and non-contributing buildings to the historic preservation district. There's kind of split in my mind at 50-50. It seems like a reasonable document. It generically describes the various styles and the periods of which the building inventory was constructed. And then it has some brief guidelines. It has guidelines for both renovating existing structures and also putting in new structures, which before everybody got here, I had a couple concerns about, and I don't know how, I guess my question would be, do I articulate these concerns as representative of the Historic Preservation Board or not?
Yes, you do.
Well, let's see what if everybody agrees with them. So guidelines for maintaining the pattern of the uptown built environment, which I'm mostly, I think their guidelines are pretty good. I mean, I've seen a lot of these things over the years. But one bullet point is a little bit nebulous. New construction should employ similar proportions and roof changes to those of the adjacent buildings. That's fine if the adjacent buildings are quality buildings.
Right.
But if it's a substandard piece of architecture that was just built for economics and contributes really very little to the architectural character. It doesn't recognize certain metrics on the street facades, then I think it's something that needs to be amended. Because, you know, you go through all of this stuff and you define what's historically significant, and they try and get through the vocabulary, but then they just make this blanket statement and go right up front and underneath it's under guideline. And then the others are a little more detailed about solid void relationships, window to wall, all of that, which I'm fine with. Brick masonry. Don't use many chemicals if you don't have to, all that. Nobody would disagree with most of these things, but the one that got me the most was the style of the new construction should be contemporary and should not attempt to imitate the style or detailing of existing or historic buildings. Detailing elements utilized, if desired, should be simplified. So basically what it's saying is we don't want traditional buildings. Any new building should be contemporary and not traditional. And because basically you have a collection of styles that are historic, but I see no reason why you should exclude traditional architecture in a historic preservation district. Because basically you're saying that the modern and the contemporary is there and it's forevermore. That's what you're gonna get more of. And we've got enough historic and traditional buildings on our streetscape that I just don't agree with the premise.
I don't disagree with you, but I know from design guidelines and ordinances I worked on in another city that the purpose for that is actually is having to do with national register things where you are not supposed to wholly 100% imitate and copy and basically the Disney World effect or the Colonial Williamsburg effect. That's what people don't want. It's not that they can't
I'm
do
not aware of
traditional.
that, but that's
Yeah.
not what they're saying.
I agree, yeah, I think that the purpose is, and I don't think the language is worded correctly, but I don't think the purpose is to only have modern and contemporary. I think the purpose is to ensure that people are not making, do you know what I mean? Making basically,
Tudor.
yeah,
Well,
making a fake facade.
I disagree with that. I mean, I spend a lot of time, I grew up in a small town and, a lot of people are against development, not because they're anti-development, because they know what they know is gonna replace what was taken away. And I think this was a huge motivation for the historic preservation movement in the beginning anyways. And the notion, and what we did where I grew up in my town, I'm always trying to put pieces back on the street. We do traditional work. I suppose that's my mission as a professional, is to do quality traditional architecture, whether it's commercial or residential. These guys would never say this on one of the residential streets in Mount Lebanon. They wouldn't get away with it. And in fact, it's in direct contradiction to the design guidelines that are in the residential zoning code. So when you ask anybody what they really want, they're not going to tell you they're looking for modern buildings. Not that they don't agree with it, but I do agree with what you're saying about the kitsch of copying a style.
Yeah.
But being faithful to a traditional style and doing it well with craftsmanship
Yeah, that's
and
promoted.
artistry
Sure.
should not be excluded from the recommendations that they're making.
Yeah.
And that's where I agree with
No, I think it needs to
Williamsburg.
change,
Because
yeah.
Williamsburg, what you're doing then is you're taking your historic district, freezing it in a moment in time, and then making it a museum piece.
Right, yeah, and that's what we don't want. Yeah.
And that's what they did with Williamsburg. They said any building after 1697, forget what the date is, you might know. They demolished half of Williamsburg to get where they are right now. People don't realize that. And
I
they
did
said,
not
after this date, we're not gonna have any
Basically,
buildings.
all of Williamsburg is fake.
Really?
It's not, it was designed to literally be a theme park of historic America.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've never been. there.
People think that it is, but I think in ordinances typically is that they don't want it to become that, but I agree, we should definitely still allow for traditional architecture, so it shouldn't be all modern contemporary items, yeah. Absolutely.
But we don't want, I guess, I look
If you don't
at,
want a caricature of it, it's just the language needs to be.
See,
changed.
any architecture can be debased. Modern architecture in the 60s and, certainly was. It was designed with certain ideals, but now we're kind of undoing a lot of that in terms of urban planning. And I think that's where, that's when historic preservation really got its robust movement. It was a reaction to the modernist top-down planning that destroyed what World War II couldn't do. Really, I mean.
But historic preservation is a moving target. And now those 60s neighborhoods and buildings are historical.
It's still not supposed to be, like the 80s are almost there, yeah.
There's great examples of modernist architecture
Yeah.
out there, just like any other architectural style. So I just wouldn't exclude one or say that one narrow band of architecture should be filling in the missing teeth
Yeah.
of Mount Lebanon.
I agree, because it's true, eventually then it will all become.
That also seems to contradict the other thing you're talking about of having contiguous architecture. That you should try to,
Well, no, it's not, I don't think you were saying, like not having contiguous, roof lines in terms of style. It was more in terms of, like structure, right?
They were saying this, the previous point that they
Yeah.
made was saying that the construction should employ similar proportions and roof shapes to those adjacent. So like, what if you have a Tudor here and a flat 1960 office box here, and you're sandwiched between the two, what do you do? I mean, that's a minor one. I mean, I think they're both addressable, but I think the intent, let's say historic preservation was to be codified somehow in the future, like I mentioned, maybe you don't have hope for that, but I think this would have terrible consequences in the long run, and I think it's somewhat contradictory to what we would advise on the residential streets and in places like Virginia Manor and Mission Hills, or any of our great neighborhoods here. I mean, I've there 25 years, and I still, the layering of detail and craftsmanship on these old streets is just phenomenal.
It's true.
I want to see it, the downside is what was destroyed. The worst part is really Uptown. And since I've been here 25 years, I've seen Uptown really kind of come back a little bit, and some of these buildings get addressed, but there was a lot of damage in the 20 or 30-year window here. A lot of stuff got covered up with vinyl and crappy stucco that was inconsistent with the original, intent, let's say, but it's like anywhere else.
Well, as I think about this topic, and again, this is just my interpretation, and again, I'm not an architect, so I defer, but I've seen successful business districts, and they tend to, or are tending toward, having robust mixed use, right? You have, retail, you have office, and you have residential, right, mixed in, right? That is that trend that we're seeing even in big cities now. And so the question in my mind is, how do you incentivize behavior to improve a facade? What does that mean, right? Because a facade can be lots of things, right? It could be vinyl, or it could be really fancy, and have a certain aesthetic feel for that to create continuity in the space. Whether I have a grocery store or a record shop or an entrance to, apartments or whatever it might be, right? Townhomes in the back. For me, that it's that dynamic of how do you create that experience in the space with private property owners, or incentivize that experience. Knowing that it's signage, it's some variation on that facade experience. While still saying, and you want residential, you want, some parking, you do what you want to do on the back. And how do, and again, I haven't read it yet, I haven't seen it, so
These are very general. I'll have to say that what they've written here is pretty safe. From recommendations. I mean, there's really not a lot that's controversial in here, or even that detailed to be so prescriptive as to say you have to do this.
Okay.
So I think it's in that regard, it's a reasonable document, and It's not gonna give a lot of specific instruction though to individuals who want to improve their property in such a way that. You know, some of these workshops might do or some other means or mechanism, but that's only the first draft and there's another draft which will add sections to it too, so it might fill in with more detail. But I think a lot of it's not even, it's not even stylistically, it's not the styles that's the issue. I think one argument that you can make is that historic community character as contributed to by historic preservation is one component. Stimulates, there's a value argument, right? When you create a sense of place and a community that people want to be a part of and they're proud of, that creates synergy and, draws people in. I think the other thing is a lot of what makes successful streetscapes, it's social and psychological. And so what you do is you promote policies that create physical form where there's always activity, surveillance, hours are extended to a larger part of the day. You don't have dead zones on the street like, everyone, when the convention center went in downtown Pittsburgh with this waterfall design in the roof and all this spectacular stuff. I hate that though. And it's not because it's modernist, it's because it kills the street. That thing, it creates a dead zone between the strip and Penn Avenue that you don't want to walk on at night. Because there's no points of entry off the block whenever you have, so, conversely, small town America, every 8 seconds, you've got a new storefront, a new opening to penetrate. And that's one of the reasons I know when they were talking about eliminating office use on the first floor, I'm an opponent of that in the zoning ordinance, because when you take an office environment, you get a bigger footprint on a storefront, and then you shut it down at 5 o'clock and there's nothing.
Right.
There's half a block gone.
Right.
Out of your uptown. So those are the types of things that dovetail with historic preservation that I think could be discussed.
Aaron, thanks, Doug. You want to maybe share that preservation plan with us?
To the draft?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I mean, Eric sent it to me. I can just forward it, right?
Right.
Yeah. Or, am I allowed to do that yet? Or should I get it clear? I mean, I
I
don't
generally try to be careful about sharing draft
want to get it
documents.
too, yeah,
Then it gets
gets out there.
forgotten that it's
and then it
early,
gets
but-
preliminary.
It's not to
Criticism.
hide anything, so just share it, don't,
Okay, just to.
as forgiveness, not permission.
All right.
Well, just.
I don't think we're gonna forward
Preservation
it.
plan is something that we should be aware of, but, at the draft stage. What's going on, so.
Well, yeah, and again, I mean, my recommendation would be, review it, compile your thoughts. I do it into one document, whether maybe to you. Right, we should all agree. And you don't think you have to formally vote on it, but just if you're all like, yeah, we all agree on this, I would say that the Historic Preservation Board has these thoughts.
That's generally what we've done with these things, whether it's planning or whatever, but it's come to us and then we've discussed it and given, Marilyn, you take it back. and
I'll take it
tell
to them.
What we're thinking, we don't go public or anything with it. Just in-house, so. I'd like to see what they're have with this draft.
Yeah, it's Main Street Design Guidelines. Landmarks SGA.
Put up on the website yet, or?
We don't publicize anything until they're adopted, so
Yeah.
it wouldn't be made public.
Eric sent it to me the next Friday, the day after he got it, so. Right.
Well, it's not our document, it's the partnership.
Oh, that's right. I
Yeah,
forgot
So
that.
we wouldn't publish it even
We
then.
would
Yeah.
publish it even now.
All right, well, thanks, Doug. All right, thank you, everybody. This-
I want one more question. What am I supposed to do moving forward in this role?
Theoretically, you're supposed to be getting invitations to those meetings, so their next stages are gonna be talk about placemaking and art and things like that.
Okay.
There were some conversations about maybe including historic signage in with the new, because when we put together the historic signs, we kind of skipped over the business district because they didn't really have a plan for the signage and wayfinding and how that was gonna look. And maybe there were some opportunities from interpretive signage in the district. Maybe something up by the historical society building. So definitely you should be receiving an invitation to those meetings once they have them, when they start talking about that. And that's why we want a design professional in that. That's why you wanted a design professional in that role, because you were actually looking at what was being designed.
Okay.
So historically, it's been an architect. in that position.
Just so we can keep tabs on what they're proposing at an early stage, so that we can have some input.
Other things they've been talking about, just so you know, activating Firstways, that's that alley behind the T that's pitch
Yeah.
central. Talk about making that more attractive and maybe being able to put something down there, maybe making if you take that loop all the way around Washington Road, sorry, wrong side of the building, it's exactly a mile, doing some sort of fitness walk around that area, maybe even reconfiguring some of Clearview Common. There's been talk about that, public art. We talked about doing something on the front of the parking garage. Yeah. So, nothing disruptive.
What about,
Okay, all right, well,
6:58.
thank you, yes, we will, call for adjournment. We're gonna ask for a motion. We are adjourned.
You've actually run out the battery on my laptop.
Yeah.
So.
So our next meeting, August
Don't worry about it.
21st,
I completely agree with you.
5 P.M.
I just was thinking, like,
Yep.
maybe that's what they.